What is up, NBA fans? Welcome into another week of Dropping Dimes. I'm your host, Matt Knost, and the conference finals are upon us. We had game one in the East last night, game one in the West tonight, and we're going to talk about last night's game, look forward to what adjustments can be made, and then a preview of tonight's matchup and that series. I'm excited. I'm sure all of you are excited. So let's jump right in, and we'll go ahead and begin with the Eastern Conference last night. So it's a tale of two halves, and really it's a tale of three quarters versus one. Um, because on paper, if you watch last night's game, last night the Heat won. They resoundingly beat the Boston Celtics last night. It ended up being an 11-point game overall. It was 118 to 107 for the Heat. But really, it's the third quarter. The third quarter is the entire difference for both these teams. The Boston Celtics won the first quarter. In the first quarter, they're up by 3. Boston Celtics win the second quarter by 5 points, so it takes them into an 8-point lead into the half. And then the third quarter, the Heat roll out 25 more points than the Celtics, take the lead, never surrender it. Then the Celtics win the fourth quarter. They win a 6-point margin right there. But ultimately, it didn't matter. The Heat just so thoroughly destroyed them in the third that they built up a large enough lead and then held on to that lead. I mean, it was weird to watch because Jason Tatum was dominant and the best player in the first half. And then we go to the third quarter and the second half, but the third quarter, and he was non-existent. I didn't even feel like he was out on the floor. The Celtics didn't score a bucket until like the 4:53 mark or something along those lines in the third quarter. Not a single bucket. They had a couple free throws, I believe, before then. And Miami was doing whatever it wants. And the weird thing is, when you dive into some of the numbers, like points in the paint, the Celtics won that battle. Points off fast break, the Celtics win that battle. Like differentials by and large are pretty much the same, overall. They shoot roughly the same number of free throws between the two of them, although Miami shot 2 more, but they hit 6 more free throws overall. Their 3-point percentages between the two teams were roughly the same. Their field goal percentages were within, field goal overall was within 3.2% between the two. I mean, in fact, Boston made one extra 3 over Miami. The turnovers were relatively close. Boston had a few more turnovers, and the points off turnovers, Boston wins that by 2. It's 19-17. It didn't feel like it watching the game, especially in the third quarter. I mean, those lazy passes where Butler and others managed to get a steal at the top of the key and then go down and get an easy bucket. It was a string of those over and over again. And I know for the Celtics, you can point to, look, we didn't have Marcus Smart and we didn't have Al Horford. And that was representative in the fact that Nesmith, who you haven't seen much of anything from in the playoffs thus far, had a decent amount of playing time last night. And boy, he was a roller coaster to watch because he would have just a tremendous highlight block and then turn it around with a foul or a turnover, or it's like, oh, look at that, is amazing. And he screws up the very next play. And it was just up and down with him. But, Smart, who's on a trajectory to come back for game 2, he's got a sprain in his foot. Whether or not he'll be able to come back is going to make a huge difference for them because they need to find somebody that can slow down Butler. I mean, Butler was feasting at the line, but he was also forcing Boston into situations where they had to play him so tight because the rest of the Miami Heat, Tyler Hero had a good game. Gabe Vincent was a strong performer, but Bam disappeared. He was really passive, which was strange to watch. Um, Perhaps he didn't feel like he needed to get going because Jimmy's going so well. But if you could slow down Jimmy, now you're asking Tyler to shoulder more of the burden, but also like Strus and Vincent to step up and play even better than they did. And I think that's kind of what you got in game one is a little bit of what you want from Strus and Vincent. It's like, if you can go out, get us some key buckets, just keep the ball moving around, don't make any mistakes. That's precisely what we need from you. And we'll let the other guys do the heavy lifting. And if you can get Jimmy out of sorts, and then if Bam no shows again, well, now you're saying, Tyler, you really need to amp up your production, and Gabe and Max, please fill in the gaps around it. Oladipo. It's one thing. Miami's got some depth. But Boston being down two of its starters and two guys that have been phenomenal for him in the playoffs thus far, and being down those two guys and leading going into half, all signs were pointing towards Boston is going to close this out in game one. And, the Heat, it was just impressive to watch in the third quarter. Over and over and over. Get a stop, get out, run, transition bucket, or get into their half court set, move the ball around, find an open shot consistently over and over again, or get the ball to Jimmy and let Jimmy get a bucket or get fouled. Actually, let's just let Jimmy get fouled. I mean, he shot 18 free throws. And I would say the vast, vast majority were earned. There was one or two calls I felt were negligible and didn't seem like much of a foul existed in it, but by and large, he earned those trips to the stripe, which is part of his game. He gets into the mid range and into the paint and forces the issue on defenses and makes them commit, and they've got to play him strong. Now, I think if you have Smart in there, you might be able to stymie getting him the ball into spots that he likes, or slow him down as he makes a charge towards the mid range and towards the paint and protected area. But we'll see. I mean, Al Horford was out for health and safety issues for COVID-19, and he's vaccinated. So there's a chance that he's going to be back for game two, which would make a big difference. But I think Smart would be the one they desperately need just to get to more wing defense and to slow down the guard play of the Heat, because that's what was killing them by and large last night. It wasn't Adebayo, although Tucker was hustling around and doing all the small little things that don't show up in a stat sheet. But if you're watching the game, just like getting a rebound or making his guys earn it on the defensive end. But a masterful performance from the Miami Heat in the third quarter, just coming out and responding. You're down, you're at home, and ramping up the intensity and saying, not tonight. I mean, Boston's only job is to win one of these first two games. And they had a shot in this one until they let it slip away in the third. And by slip away, I mean it got snatched from their hands, ripped mercilessly, and then run the complete opposite direction. The Heat just played with more cohesion, focus, and intensity in that third quarter. And that's the entire difference of the game. And Tatum came out after the game and said, "That's on me." He had it cooking in the first half, but in the second, he was weirdly passive, like shades of old Tatum. It reminded me of Wiggins, where Wiggins can just no-show for entire stretches of the game, especially when he had been, anointed, and you'd watch him and be like, no, I'm not sure this guy is the next coming, as everybody is, quick to nickname him Maple Jordan. He's not a bad player. He's just not that type of player. Um, and in the first half, I mean, Tatum had it going from everywhere on the floor. Now, I do wish Tatum would stop with the every time he gets touched, he complains because it's unbecoming. You're better than that. Plus, if you're the boy who cried wolf, the refs aren't going to listen when you feel like you got fouled. Take a page from Giannis's book where, all right, I thought I got fouled, but I'm moving on. I'm running up the other side of the court to play defense. Um, but I mean, it was even with that third quarter, the defensive intensity from both teams was impressive the whole game. Just in each other's faces, getting steals, getting blocks, ball pressure. Now Miami won that battle. They had more steals and more blocks overall, but it wasn't like some chasm that Boston can't overcome. Both these teams are good on both sides of the ball, and I think this is going to be a slugfest, which makes me happy. I mean, I don't have a dog in this fight, so I'd like it to see. I'd like to see it go 7 games, and hopefully it comes to a better ending than last series or last round's 7-game closeouts. But I mean, it was a good opening game, and there's a lot for each team to walk away and learn from. Um, for the Heat, it's Bam. We need you to get going, be more assertive. Although he was good on the defensive end, I mean, he had that stellar block that ended up being a wedgie into the side of the rim. But we need you to be a more impactful force on the offensive side, and we can't rely on Jimmy getting 18 free throw attempts. So we need to force the issue in other facets of the game. But overall, I mean, they played a solid game in the first half. Yes, they're down 8 going into the half, but that's not an insurmountable lead. Even if they didn't have the third quarter, 8 points, slow. You hit a couple threes, you're right back in this. Um, but that third quarter, I mean, if that doesn't feed into the ethos of Heat culture and never give up and intensity and everything else, I'm not sure what does. And I'll be interested to see as the series goes on if we have more of these close games going into the fourth. The Heat's conditioning is usually top tier, like one of the best in the league. Um, and will that come to fruition more and more as these games, as we get deeper and deeper and deeper into this series? Will you see the Boston Celtics end up more gassed towards the end of games and the Heat are chugging right along because, well, the Heat have, body shaming sessions and have weight limits built into contracts and require that you stay in peak top physical form. And, that's anomalous in the league. Not everybody even remotely comes close to doing that, but it pays dividends in situations like this where you're in better shape. You're the better athletes. And they may have more talent on the top end. You have Tatum plus Brown plus Defensive Player of the Year Marcus Smart. But you might be able to outlast them and just grind them into the ground if you can keep forcing pace, forcing the issue. Although that's the interesting thing about them. They could force the pace, but Miami is one of the slowest teams in the league. They love to get into their half court set. They don't get it out and run as much. Although last night they were running like crazy, and I think they were just taking advantage of the opportunities presented to them, which is smart basketball. It's like, oh, if we can beat them down the court. They had several leak outs where they make a 3/4 of the length of the court pass, and it was perfectly timed, and they get an easy layup out of it or an easy dunk. And so they're taking advantage of it slowly but surely. But I'll be intrigued to see how much of this pivots once the Celtics are back to full strength. Because Smart's the real looming issue. Horford will be back. So long as he returns negative tests, today and tomorrow, he'll be back for game 2. Worst case is he's back for game 3. So you're getting him back in this series regardless. Smart with the foot injury, tentatively he's set to come back for game 2, but who knows? It's kind of like Kyle Lowry on the other side with the hamstring issue. I don't know when he's going to play. All the reports I read are I guess he could play, but if he did, there's a real risk of him injuring this and taking him out for the entire duration of the playoffs. And Gabe Vincent played so well last night. I'm not sure you need him. Now, if you make it to the finals, to have somebody out on the court that's won a championship would be huge. But if he's still going to be playing at 80, 90%, I think I take Gabe in that regard. And congrats to the Miami Heat, because you have two guys who no one knew who in the hell they were before this season started. Actually, they got 4 between Strus, Vincent, Caleb Martin, and then Yurtseven, who Yurtseven probably with a little bit more seasoning and peppering will get more minutes next year going forward. He showed flashes during the season of being a solid rotational piece. But the Miami Heat just getting 4 guys that nobody else even took a look at. And they've done it before with Duncan Robinson, who now can't even get out onto the court. And he's got an albatross of a contract. But the Heat, much like the Raptors and, a small handful of other teams, managed to find these guys off the scrap heap and build them up into solid NBA players. They see the diamond and they help polish and hone it and turn it into just a freaking starter in the Eastern Conference Finals. It's amazing. Like watching the game last night, I trusted Gabe Vincent. He was playing with a lot of confidence and solid as can be. Knew when he needed to find his spots or get his teammates involved. He could be a legitimate player for them for the foreseeable future. But yeah, I think once Smart is back, then the series will begin, just because it helps apply more pressure to Butler. And if you can get Butler out of sync, now you're just saying, look, hero, we need you to go out there and carry the team. And you're going to get more minutes off of the second unit and with the starters. And you'll be closing out games. But even then, just like, okay, well, then Boston's defense can step up around there. So I'd be intrigued. But that solid game 1 win for the Miami Heat. That third quarter is a testament to their makeup and determination, and great game. I enjoyed it thoroughly. That third quarter was amazing to watch. You just saw the lead slowly evaporate and then trickle over to the other side and grow. And yeah, from there on, it was done. All right, now I'll look forward to tonight's game 1 in the Western Conference. I'll get over to the chat real quick because we've got a few people jumping in the chat. Yuri McGarley says, can't watch live tonight because I'm at work. We'll catch it later. Just want to drop by and say hello to everyone. And yippee-ki-yay, motherfuckers. Mavs win, Mavs win, Mavs win. We'll see. We'll see. Sebastian Velastegui? I'm not sure. But Sebastian says, glad to see Luka finally break through to the Western Conference Finals. Baby GOAT. Jake Cleveland, who do you see averaging more points in this series, Luka or Curry? And then Riley Pangrass, finally someone I can listen to talk basketball. All that Pat Bev nonsense was getting old. I rather enjoyed the Pat Beverly stuff just because It's not often you see a dude get to go on television and just be petty as shit, and openly so. Most guys are more cautious as to what they say and measure their words, and Pat Bev is just taking shots. Um, do I agree with everything he said? No. Did I find it entertaining? Undoubtedly. I mean, just slandering CP. Well, he got a national pulpit to go on there and talk about CP. Although I will say, the sheer number of players coming out and celebrating the demise of the Phoenix Suns is breathtaking to behold. This is a team that has been dog shit for 2 decades plus. 2 decades plus. And over the course of 2 seasons, managed to piss off everybody in the league to the degree that they go down and they're getting clowned on by their fellow players, I think is a clear testament to what kind of assholes they really are. And actually, I was rooting for the Mavs after the post-game presser. Was it game 1 or game 2 where it was part of that narrative of, is it fair that you keep picking on Luka in these pick and rolls? And the little snide side glance and chuckle between Chris Paul and Devin Booker reminded me of, coincidentally, when LeBron and Wade did that mocking Dirk being sick in the finals. And then Dirk and the Warriors ultimately, or not the Warriors, pardon me, the Mavericks ultimately win that series. But as soon as I saw that post game, I was like, no, I'm pulling for the Mavs on this one. You guys haven't won shit yet. And, then Devin goes down and calls it the Luka special, and it just all went downhill from there. That was the biggest ass kicking I've ever seen. Just flat out. In a game 7, there have been more lopsided victories and or losses for teams, but in a high pressure situation from a team that was the best in basketball for basically the entirety of the season and had a monumental lead over everybody else, and it looked like over the course of the season, didn't matter who was out, they just kept churning and winning to get your ass handed to you. The final score was what, 33-point difference? It felt like 90. I mean, they were so dejected and out of it. So yeah, I'll take the Pat Beverly slander because it's different. You normally see players be cagey and couch their answers because they don't want to piss these guys off because they still have to see them. Or if they're retired players, they want to maintain relationships so they still have sources. So Pat Bev, although he might be trying to solidify a post-career, media position, and Pat Bev would be pretty decent at it. I mean, Kendrick is good about stirring the pot, but I don't always listen to what Kendrick has to say. Whereas I think Pat Beverly has a more nuanced understanding of the game, and he's still willing to stir the pot. Although he also, sometimes certain takes are going to be completely motivated by pettiness because he doesn't like the person. But anyway, let's move on. So, Western Conference Finals. It seems like we have mostly people watching that are pulling for the Mavs tonight. And to be perfectly honest, I don't care who wins this. I like both teams. I think they're both a tremendous amount of fun to watch, and that's all I want. If you're saying, would it be nice to see someone like the Mavs win because the Warriors have won, previously? Sure. I got zero problem with that. And it's also been since 2011 for the Mavs. So let's spread the love around. I got zero problem with that. On the flip side, do I enjoy watching the Warriors play? And do I want to see like Clay get back to the more consistency he showed in game 6 and the team as a whole back to the juggernaut they were? Yeah, because I enjoyed watching it. It's fun basketball to watch. I wish my team played it. Very rarely does it devolve into, ISO time. It's move the ball around, cut, screen, keep moving, force the defense into uncomfortable situations, and let's exploit and find the best available shot. Now, there are times when it is ISO, but it is, when you watch it, at least to these eyes, much less frequent, whereas the Mavs are built upon that. Um, but I don't, the Mavs will, I think, as a preview in this, they're going to live by the ISO and they're going to die by the ISO. So if Bullock and Finney-Smith can't catch and shoot at a high enough percentage, then this is probably going to blow up in the Mavs' face. Because I will be interested, the Booker getting in game 7, getting doubled every time he saw the ball and trapping him was a smart tactic. But the fact of the matter is, Steph has seen that. Hell, you can find clips where 4 defenders crash down on Steph. The Warriors have dealt with this. So I'm not entirely sure what Kidd does in that instance, because doubling Steph is not a recipe for success. You're just then freeing up Clay, or if Poole's out there on the court, or Wiggins, or an easy inside bucket with Draymond, Kuminga, or Looney. And I'll be intrigued if Kerr stays with the Looney in the starting position. Because if Gary Payton was healthy, I think you might make him a starter, stick him on Luka. You go with a slightly smaller lineup here and just say, Luka, you're going to have to get around GP2, and we're going to force your other teammates, mainly Jalen Brunson, to cook without you. And it's one thing when Luka was out and Jalen Brunson was the focus of the offense. It's another when Luka's in there and they're taking him away, and now your teammates are standing around watching Brunson. But they're, it'll be intriguing to watch, because once you get into like the depth of the two teams, the Warriors have more depth. Like, it gets pretty shallow for Dallas if they maintain their current starting 5, with Luka, Jalen Brunson, Dorian Finney-Smith, Reggie Bullock, and Dwight Powell, right? If that's going to be their starting 5, really coming off the bench, you have 2 guys I think you trust in Maxi Kleber and Spencer Dinwiddie. Then you get into the, are we playing Bertans, or are we playing like a couple other guys? They can give you spot minutes. This is where, like, if you had Tim Hardaway Jr., just adds to your overall wing depth. Whereas for the Warriors, you got Kuminga coming off the bench. You got Jordan Poole coming off the bench. Otto Porter Jr. actually should more than likely end up playing a decent amount of minutes in this. Juan Toscano Anderson, if he'll ever see the court again, I'm not entirely sure. So I just think I trust more of the Warriors' depth when it comes to that. So Dallas, you are focused solely on Luka. And Luka has proven over the course of these playoffs, look, I can do this. And the impressive thing about him is he can cook anybody out on the court. Speed and athleticism, if he went up against a defender like a GP2, would probably give him the most pause, but he's still going to find a shot, especially if he's hitting from 3. Luka's a nightmare. Now, if he's missing his 3-point shot, I think that team's offense completely sputters and stalls, unless you're saying Dinwiddie and Brunson are going to check in and be able to shoulder the load. And look, they've shown flashes of that over the course of this series. I mean, Brunson's scoring average has gone up by 6 points a game in the playoffs. But this is also the first time that any of these guys has felt the pressure amp up a little bit more now that we've gotten to a conference finals. I'm not saying they're going to crumble under it, but the Warriors have been here. That's the one, the ace in the hole that the Warriors have. It's like, yeah, it's the Western Conference Finals. This isn't even the pressure of the finals yet. So we're still out here having fun. And I think they'll maintain more of that looseness because on some level, I think the Warriors know they're playing with house money. They've won their championships. Their legacies are solidified. This only further enhances. Yes, they want it just like any other of the four teams, or three other teams rather, left want it. But they have the least to prove. I think the only Warrior that has anything to prove at this point is, well, that's not fair because you could say the young guys that haven't been there before, but I'm saying of the established ones they've had for a while, is Clay as to whether or not he can consistently get back to anything near Clay. You know, it's got to hurt Clay because if this was 4 seasons ago and you're coming into this matchup, it's a no-brainer. You automatically go, okay, Clay, you're on Luka. And that is a solid matchup for the Warriors. Like, you're not going to stop Luka, but with Clay on him at prime defensive Clay, you could definitely slow him down and force his teammates to have to pick up the slack. And then suddenly their chances become a little bit tenuous. But Clay just doesn't have the foot speed. And, it's also asking quite a bit for a guy that's been out for so long to come back and play so many minutes. But look, he's shown flashes of being, at least on the offensive side, getting back into Clay, being Clay again. But this is going to be a fun chess match of these small adjustments here and there, or I wouldn't be surprised if eventually Kuminga enters into the starting lineup, much like they did in the Memphis series. Because when Ja goes out, they put Steven Adams into the starting rotation and they start murdering on the boards. So as a counteraction, Looney gets more playing time. But in this one, I'm not entirely sure, I'm not as fearful of Dwight Powell in that regard. And plus, I think Dallas is a more potent offense when Kleba is out there. So Powell's minutes are going to be kind of hamstrung just because you need to get Maxey out on the court. And you also don't want to get Maxey in foul trouble because you'd like him in certain late game situations. So I don't know if you're going to need Looney out there for the long stretches like you did in the last series. So does that mean then that Kerr will pivot and bring Looney off the bench and have Kuminga start and then put Kuminga's length and athleticism on Luka and just be like, don't foul, make him work, but just don't foul. I will be intrigued. Because right now, if you look at the injury report, Gary Payton is out for obviously tonight. He's more than likely out for this series. But Steve Kerr is on the record as saying it's not emphatic that he's out. There is a chance he comes back at the end of this series. I would assume not. I mean, fractured elbow with tendon and muscle damage. Seems like you're going to need a little bit more time out, but I'm not a doctor and I do not know. But as Kerr pointed out, it sucks that, he's hurt, but at least it's not a knee, an ankle, a lower body extremity. It's his elbow. So he can still get out and run drills and conditioning and be out there with his teammates as opposed to completely sidelined. Because I don't think he's in a cast even right now. It just, it's on his shooting hand. I believe it's on his left elbow. And so it limits, him in that regard. But it's not like Gary Payton is some lights out shooter. He can shoot, but he's more so about, put back dunks, finishing in the lane, and just being an overall pest on defense. It just hurts for a guy like that too, for having been on the fringes of potentially making a roster, barely holding on to finally finding his footing this season and showing out fully and playing to the best of his abilities to then have to go out like this. Although, according to Gary Payton, him and Dylan Brooks have reached out and talked to one another, and there is no beef. So that's good. They've moved on past that. Um, but yeah, I mean, this is going to be both series should be solid. I could easily see both series going 7, um, depending on how Luka plays. So go the Mavericks in this series to me. Whereas if Curry just plays okay, well, you still have Poole, you still have Clay, you still have Wiggins. You have more potent offensive weapons that can pick up where others might be, leaving off. Whereas for Dallas, you got Brunson and Dinwiddie, but Dinwiddie to me he's either really on or you're not getting much of anything. And then Brunson has been consistent. But I'll be intrigued if Luka has an average or bad night. Is Brunson going to be able to sense that and pick up the slack? Because I just think the overall offensive depth of the Warriors is going to be tough. But Jason Kidd is proven that he's a good coach. And, they bring him in and they immediately become better on defense. And he gets them all to buy in. And I think that he can find the small adjustments to keep Golden State honest and make this a series. So I could easily see both of these series going 7. I favor the Warriors in this series, and in the Boston-Miami going into it, I favored Boston. I still think I like Boston overall a slight bit more because I think the balance on that team as a whole makes a little bit more sense to me. And I think it hinges upon rather, whether or not Tatum actually learned the lesson of game 1, which is you can't check out this late in the playoffs. You just can't. Especially when you played that well in the first half. You need to keep it going. You're on a pace to score more points than Butler ended up with, which is 41. You got to continue because the team is feeding you. You're finding your spots, but you're also not sucking all the oxygen in the room out by shooting your team out of it. Because he had a all around well-faceted first half. He had, getting good assists, rebounds, playing solid defense, just like you're doing everything that a superstar should be doing. And this is the final level of your ascendancy is making it to the finals where you're the primary. But we'll see. Game 2 will be the huge linchpin. And for Dallas is the same as Boston. You just need one of two. And the Warriors now have the best record left of any team in the playoffs. So they're going to have home court if they advance from this as well into the finals, but they have the home court in this series. And the Warriors have yet to lose at the Chase Center this year in the playoffs. So will that streak maintain or would Dallas be able to steal one? I think game 1 goes to Golden State, but then the adjustments that Kidd could make could finally steal one in game 2. We'll see. We'll see what kind of game we get tonight. But it should be really interesting. All right, let's jump over to the chat. So Daniel Savla says, hello. Jake Cleveland. Hey, everyone. If you haven't checked out Winning Time, you should. It's pretty awesome. I will agree with that. Riley Pangrass says, Wiggins draws the assignment of covering Luka. I'd assume so. I mean, you want to put somebody with length and athleticism on him, and I'd be fearful of putting Draymond on him because he could cook Draymond but you also run the risk of getting Draymond into foul trouble. And, he's kind of their default point guard plus floor general on defense. So if you take him out of the equation, it screws up more of what they do. And if I'm Luca, I'm getting switches until I get Draymond, try and force the issue and get him into foul trouble to get him off the court. Because you're not really worried about what total offensive numbers that Draymond is going to put up. What you're worried about is him surveying the floor, playing a two-man game with Curry, where they just keep doing these little handoff screen back and forth until the entire offense opens up. But he's a great floor general in that regard. Almost always makes the correct pass, just sees the floor in a really great way because the Warriors don't really have a point guard, a traditional point guard. So yeah, I would try, even though Draymond is a good defender, I would try and force the issue on him to get him into foul trouble and get him off the court as best I could. But yeah, I could see Wiggins. It makes the most sense that Wiggins is going to draw the assignment early. Possibly Clay, but I don't think Clay can stay in front of him anymore. Although you never know. It's not as though Luka's, foot speed and everything is something that's going to give you pause. It just his overall footwork when he gets down into the low block, and it's the pump fake up and under, and he's just going to keep probing until he finds, a seam and slips through that seam and gets a shot. Whether it's the up and under and he gets a layup out of it, or it's that turnaround where he does a Dirk-esque fadeaway type of shot. Yeah, his footwork in the post is really impressive. So Jake Cleveland says, with the Warriors' depth, Luka is going to have to average 50 points. There could come a game where he needs 50 to stay in this consistently over the course of the series. If that's the case, this is going to be a quick series. Because there's going to be a night, one of these nights, the Warriors are going to be off, and they're going to shoot piss poor. And Steph, Clay, and Poole are all going to be just poor from the floor. So unless they're all on or two of the three are on for every game, I don't know that I see Luka needing to get 50 to stay in this. Because Dallas's defense is legit. So a bunch of those games, Golden State's not going to be able to run up the score. But you never know. You could be right, Jake. So JMB says, this is a broader question for after, but I remember a number of years back when Golden State went 72-9 and infamously didn't finish with a ring, and we're on a tear for multiple seasons. Since then, they're still a powerhouse, barring injuries, but it also doesn't feel the same. Is this a factor of the league catching up, adjusting? Is it hard to maintain a roster with absolute snipers like that while having a semblance of defense? Would love to hear your thoughts. Thanks. Yeah, I think it's a bunch of those things. The league progresses, defenses change, guys also got older. Clay being out for this duration of time and now coming back, he's like working slowly back into a semblance of what he was, but he's nowhere near 100% Clay. And through contracts and everything else, you have to let certain guys go. Now, the Warriors have got the band back together. You have your primaries of Steph, Draymond, Clay, Looney, and Iguodala, who's been out. You have all those guys back. Then you just need to fill in around the edges, and they've done that with late draft picks, early draft picks, cast-offs from other teams, and Porter and like Bielitsa, who I'll be intrigued. Let's see if Bielitsa gets a little time in this. Might need him out there for the shooting because you don't have to worry about a 5 destroying you, like previous the overall size of Memphis when you've got Jaren Jackson, Steven Adams, Xavier Tillman. Like they've got a bunch of bigs to throw out there that you got to worry about. at the very least on the board and paint situation. Um, so the Warriors have retooled while maintaining their identity. So they found guys that fit into their system. And the fact of the matter is, when you watch them, I bet you a bunch of those guys, like I'm thinking of Otto Porter Jr. specifically, because he was a Bull for a short time, um, really made his name in the league on the Wizards before that, just in the announcing, like, I'm somebody who can play in this. But to go to the Warriors, I've seen him play with more happiness this season than I can recall at other times. When they announced, oh, we got Otto Porter Jr., having watched him on the Bulls, I was like, well, good luck with that. He's going to be out a bunch. And then when he's in, I'm not sure exactly what he's going to give you. And now when you're watching it, you're like, yeah, no, I know what Otto Porter is going to give him. A small spark plug off the bench. He can extend the floor by shooting from depth and some solid defensive minutes. And then he's going to take a seat. So the Warriors just retooled with veteran minimums. And then because they were down for that short duration with Clay going out and then Curry got hurt and whatnot, and they were a shell of the former selves, they got some high draft picks, and you got somebody like Kuminga, Moody, and then Wiseman, who's not going to play, which is crazy. I'd be curious if he ever actually really makes an impact at this point. It's starting to get to the scary portion of, is this dude ever going to be able to play? But Kuminga and Moody, Kuminga is kind of everything that they want, especially going forward, which is a super athletic guy who can play make and force the issue deep in the paint because they got shooters. They don't need another shooter, although it's nice to have Poole. Poole was a late first rounder that was derided when he was drafted, but he's blossomed into the third Flash brother, and he can get as hot as anybody and just go off. So it's but the you know defenses matured. They had certain guys left, KD, and they had injuries, and that kind of brought them back down to earth. And now that they're healthy again, this is going to be them putting it together one final time because they're all advancing and they've only got so much of their prime left. Not everybody is LeBron. Just look at the other aging stars. Now, all these guys are younger than LeBron or CP, but still, if history is any kind of track record, we're going to see some slippage over the next 2 seasons to 3 seasons for the bulk of their crew. So there is the motivation of, I don't know how many more of these runs we have in us. Or it's a shift in dynamic for them and Poole emerges as the go-to guy. And then you have Steph and Clay is kind of like spot-up shooters eventually. But their skill set should translate into, if they want to, they can play. They can have longer careers. Although eventually, without Steph running off multiple screens and whatnot, will his size finally be an overall detriment to him? He'll still be a lights out shooter, but it'll be interesting. But that's, a few seasons from now. So let's see. Owen Hart says, people are so reactionary to game ones. The Celtics played really bad and lost game one versus the Bucks. And that game was in Boston. Last night's game one wasn't terrible, and it was an away game for Boston. Boston in 6 for Owen Hart. I still like Boston because I like the depth of the team overall, and I think they have more players that I've gotten accustomed to seeing play out in these kind of spots. But at the same time, it's like, well, Miami, the core of their group, have made a finals push in the not too distant past. So what's to say that they didn't grow and mature from that? But I agree. Reaction to game one is always over the top. It's like, it's over. It's over. That's it. Go ahead and crown the Heat the winner of the series and be like, it's nowhere close. Game 5 is more indicative of who's going to win this series than game 1. So anyway, I agree with you, Owen. So Owen Hart said Heat didn't even play great defense. Tatum legit just threw the ball to the Heat like 4 possessions in a row. An 8th grader would know not to throw those passes. There were a couple which is like, that was lazy as shit. And Tatum did have like 2 buckets in the first half that were winging a prayer and they went in and he was looking for a foul. I still think overall, like the Heat's defense was smothering when it mattered on those blocks. I mean, that closeout block of Butler and Tatum from 3, where he just jumped up, elevated, and closed. They played with a defensive intensity to close the game, to secure that lead and make sure that they didn't let their foot off of the gas. They stepped on the Celtics' throat and they maintained that pressure until the end. In the first half, though, I would agree their defense was nowhere near what the second half was. And you're right in that a few of those turnovers in the third quarter, especially, were just laziness. The back-to-back steal at the top of the key to get a layup was just, I don't know what you were thinking on that pass. Just down on yourself and frustrated and whatnot. And I'm sure Ime was all in their ears. And rightly so. Well, Sebastian has asked my thoughts on the new film from Sandler, Hustle. I don't know. I just saw the trailer, so I don't really know all that much about it beyond the trailer as of right now. I'll probably end up watching it. The basketball movies can be hit and miss, and mostly miss. I think there's only a handful that I thoroughly love. And there's one all time for me, which is White Men Can't Jump. The fact that they're redoing that to me is asinine. But, make it for a younger generation. It's not like it's some Pantheon classic for others. But then after that, Hoosiers, I guess, He Got Game, Blue Chips. Like, it's slim pickings pretty quickly. But anyway. Well, all right. I think that's it for this week's Dropping Dimes. Thank you to everybody that joined in the chat. Yuri, enjoy this later, sir. Sebastian, Jake Cleveland, Riley Pangrass, Daniel Savoy, JMB, Owen Hart. And thank you to everybody. It was great to see you. I hope you guys enjoyed tonight's game 1 in the Western Conference Finals. I'll see you guys next week after we've gotten quite a few games under our belt, and we'll have a better idea as to the trends and trajectories of these series. And before we get out of here, congratulations to the Orlando Magic for winning the NBA draft lottery. I can't wait to see how you guys fuck this up. It's going to be impressive. Seems like there's a no-brainer according to all the scouts between top 3-4 guys. They all seem like they're really good. I don't know. I don't watch college basketball outside of 2-3 games max over the course of a season. I did see Banchero play. I watched a Duke game or two in the tourney, but that's about it. So I don't know. But yeah, congrats to the Magic. Maybe they're actually starting to figure something out down there. But we'll see you guys next week with another edition of Dropping Dimes. Until then, stay safe out there. I'll see you guys real soon. Adios.